Welcome into another edition of DNVR Rams Live, presented by our friends at Branded Bills. Head to brandedbills.com. Use that code BBDNVR for 15% off your first order. Hope everybody has had a solid week. Nice couple of days. I appreciate everybody that tuned into our show on Thursday. Certainly appreciate CSU helping us put together an awesome lineup. If you missed it, CSU volleyball coach Emily Kohan, athletic director John Weber, and head football coach Jay Norvell all came down in studio. It was hot. I mean, it was really hot that day. So they were troopers, and it's not exactly easy to get around Colfax at the moment. So I'm very appreciative of CSU institutionally for including us in that. They always do a little Denver caravan where they visit, the Denver TV stations. I think they usually visit Altitude Radio, the Denver Post, stuff like that. But they have always been great in including me and this show. It's the third time we had Norvell on in studio. We've had him on remotely a couple of other times, but the first time we've been able to have Emily Kohan on, first time we had John Weber on, and it was awesome. So if you missed it, make sure you go check it out. About 45 minutes with all of them. We were a little bit rushed, so I wish we could have gotten a few more minutes with Jay at the end. We had a plan. Traffic around Denver kind of screwed some things up. Again, it was a tight window. They're going from outlet to outlet, but I was just appreciative that it happened at all. So make sure you go check that out. A lot of good stuff in there. If you noticed, I got more junk in the background. Home studio 4.0 setup. Finally went out and just got like a cheap, thing of shelves here so I could put up some of the other stuff I had. We got a new volleyball the other day from that visit with CSU. So cool. I finally have something to do with all this junk. 25 years of collecting and maybe debatably hoarding are starting to pay off. If you're rocking live with us this morning, make sure you give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Say good morning in the Toyota chat, all of that fun stuff. Josh says, that's my jersey. For those of you that can't see it, I'm rocking the old school Mountain West era Caleb Haney jersey. I reminded him that he found an authentic macaroni shoulder Ag Day jersey that he got when we were doing the garage sale before they switched to Under Armour. That's awesome. That's definitely a keeper. I will say, as much as I love our Ag uniforms these days, and I truly feel like we've perfected them. I know some people advocate to go back to the green pants and go true pumpkin and alfalfa, literally look like pumpkins. But I think what they've done now is so sharp. And when you go back and you look at those original, Russell era Ag Day uniforms, that year one was just an atrocious fit. But we perfected it. Regular dad bod / Ben, he wants to know, does this mean more volleyball coverage? I mean, I talk about the team over the course of the season. I don't have the manpower or time to be able to cover every single team, every single game, especially now that I'm doing the Avs stuff as well. But I mean, I certainly do my best to at least cover the main headlines and give updates. But it was cool to have Cohen on, and I'd like to be able to do more stuff like that. I don't know if game-to-game coverage is ever going to be all that realistic, but we can get some of the star players, coaches on the show, maybe some written features, stuff like that. I'm definitely going to try and branch out into some new stuff this year. And if there is an appetite within the CSU fan base to get a little bit more in depth on the written side with some of that volleyball, soccer, etc. type coverage, we'll do our best to accommodate you. I wanted, before we talked about Tory Horton and before we went down memory lane a little bit, I'm going to give what I think are the 10 biggest conference wins of the Mountain West era. 3 weeks ago or so, we went into just kind of the biggest moments period in the Mountain West era, but I realized most of those were non-conference matchups. Some of the Lubick era wins over CU and stuff like that. I thought it would be fun to go a little bit more in depth on the conference side of things, just given that it is the final year in the Mountain West before CSU moves on to the Pac-12. But at the beginning here, I just kind of wanted to talk about a couple of the things that really stood out to me in those conversations with Weber and Norvell specifically on Thursday. Again, if you missed it, I really do encourage you to go check it all out. But these are just kind of some of the things that I jotted down after the interview that I wanted to keep fresh in my mind. One of the biggest storylines that I think that came out of it was that CSU and Wyoming are unlikely to keep their continuous streak going. It does not sound like the border war is going to happen in 2026 and 2027. They already have a long-term schedule agreement in place for 2028 and beyond. But due to both schools having full non-conference slates, this is kind of one of the pitfalls of how far in advance they do the non-conference scheduling. And there are some politics that come into play when it comes to stuff like this. Neither side is going to want to give up a home game. When you factor in that CSU now aims for 7 home games every year, a lot like what you see from some of those big-time SEC and Big Ten schools, makes it that much harder to, move things around, especially at this stage of the whole process. I'm not gonna lie, that really stinks. That's a significant bummer to me. And as excited as I am about the move to the Pac-12, I do think that sucks. I don't really know what you're supposed to do about it. I understand that with this move, there are going to be some things that happen, and we're going to have to be a little bit flexible, and we're going to have to be understanding that, not every year is going to be what we've always known it to be in the past. There's a lot of teams, that we've seen historically that we're not going to see anymore. I'm glad that CSU and Wyoming have both prioritized keeping the rivalry alive, that we already have that on paper and it doesn't become some wishy-washy thing. I hope that these 2 years, assuming that the game doesn't happen, end up being, a blip in the whole history, and that, after this agreement, we get another one going. And I've just always been a big proponent of rivals, particularly regional rivals, sticking together. Both schools are better off playing this matchup. There's so much shared history. But I did want to throw that out there for those that didn't have time to consume that whole interview. It's not set in stone yet that it's not happening. I do think it's something that both schools will continue to explore. But Weber, being pretty honest on our show, said unlikely that is going to happen. Josh says, any chance one of those years Wyoming uses the Hawaii exception since CSU only has 7 conference games right now? That's a good question. I'm not sure if that would be applicable because at CSU, even though they only have the 7 conference games, I think the expectation is that there will be another conference opponent added by the time 2026 rolls around, just kind of based on some of the things I've heard behind the scenes. So you have to factor that into all of this as well. But that is something that I will dive into deeper and see if I can get some information on things. I'll have to reach out to some of my friends up in Laramie, and I'll have to dig around a little bit in Fort Collins as well. But it is kind of funny to me, especially given what we're going to be talking about today, and the best wins in Mountain West history, best conference wins, I should say, for CSU. I went back and I was reading some of the articles on the split of the WAC, which had gotten, I think, to 16 teams. It was just too many. And the original Mountain West was founded partially because schools like CSU were losing annual regional matchups with schools like Utah, and I think there was the possibility of not playing Air Force annually. It's just funny to me that not that long ago, the late 90s, I guess it's been some time. It wasn't yesterday by any means, but not that long ago, conferences were breaking up because of wanting to emphasize regional rivalries even more. And now we're just throwing all of that out the window. Then you go through and you look at some of the schedules from over the years and you realize how many of those seasons, in the Lubick era, that CSU played Wyoming and Utah and BYU and CU and Air Force every single year. I mean, that was half your schedule all right here in the Mountain Time Zone. And I'd be lying if I said it doesn't make me yearn for the old days a little bit. I've been very honest that I think the move to the Pac-12 is the right one based on everything that has happened really in the larger college football world over the last couple of years. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. Boise and San Diego State have been trying to get out. They've almost gotten out a couple of times. You just could not get left behind in the league again without those schools. The league as a whole recovered nicely after losing Utah, BYU, and TCU. But this time around, when you look at the options to backfill and who the Mountain West has gone out and replaced the departing schools with, it just would have been a really bitter pill to swallow had CSU been left around. So the only reason I bring all of that up is, yes, it sucks to not keep this continuous streak with Wyoming going likely, but it's kind of a necessary evil in what is hopefully going to be a play that, you know, in the grand scheme of things, this is going to work out better for CSU and their future. I did ask Weber if there was any possibility of CSU debuting a new alternate this year. I had heard at one point, like back closer to COVID, that there was a 1990 Freedom Bowl throwback that had been greenlit, and then COVID happened and it never fell apart. I don't know if that's potentially in the mix down the line, but Weber said no comment. That was interesting to me. He was just out there with Under Armour. Maybe we will see some new threads this year. That would be pretty cool. He also, you know, has said that CSU and Utah State have had conversations. The administration has recently changed at Utah State, so I'm sure this isn't their biggest priority, but I've talked about a couple of times now over the last couple of years the possibility of CSU and Utah State implementing a traveling trophy. They've played 80 times. It's one of the schools that CSU's played. In the top 5 in terms of series history, they've actually played Utah State more than Air Force over the years. I understand that you can't force a rivalry. I do think those are something that have to form organically, but I really do feel like when you look at the series history as a whole, it's basically 500 both ways. I think CSU has a 2-game advantage in the all-time series. But when you look at that, and especially the last 15 years and all the crazy matchups, all the weird things that have happened, some years CSU's been really good, Utah State's been really good, even in some of the seasons where neither team was contenders, they've ended up playing some really fun, weird matchups. I mean, to me, it's kind of already there. There's some animosity on the basketball side as well. Regionally, I just think it makes a lot of sense, but I do want it to be known, even though it sounds like both institutions have had the same thought as me. If that traveling trophy, if that idea does come to fruition, I am still 100% taking credit, as I said to John Weber. Kind of the last thing that really stood out to me in terms of my combo with John was I asked him, how do you assess what is a successful season for CSU football this year? And he went back to a talking point that he's been pretty consistent with all sports, which is really that CSU is aiming to swim in different waters. You know, I've talked a lot about the move to the Pac-12 being ambitious, and it's not one that you do with hopes of just being a run-of-the-mill, middle-of-the-pack type program. He talked about winning when the lights are brightest on that national stage, and how that is, you know, the most valuable thing for the program. Reading between the lines of that, to me, it's not about just getting to a bowl game this year. I think you've got to win. I think you've got to build off of what you did last year, but I think you've got to earn some style points along the way, which means, you know, you can't lose 50-0 week 1. You've got to, you know, really perform well in those key home games in September against UTSA, against Washington State. You know, Washington State, Oregon State, Boise State, these are your peers at this point. You know, it's not even 2017 anymore. At this point, you know, it's not an excuse to not be able to hang with those types of teams. So we shall see what happens there. Norvell also emphasized wanting to have a hotter start. I think it's paramount on multiple levels. Just for one thing, getting some confidence, getting some momentum as a team, not digging yourself in a hole that you have to climb out of, which has basically been the case, not just for Jay. I mean, it was a commonality throughout the Bobo era as well. I mean, when was the last time CSU had a winning record in September? Off the top of my head, I can't even think. It was 500 at best. It would be so nice to finally see CSU go 3-1, or, you know, if we're really getting crazy, 4-0, something like that. He pointed to Dylan Phelps and Owen Long as young standouts to keep an eye on. A couple of guys I've been very high on over the last 6 months. Owen Long in particular, I would be shocked if he's not an all-conference player at the end of the year. That's how high I am on him. And Evans, you know, I voted for preseason defensive player of the year. So I think that linebacking duo and is going to be really solid for CSU. You also bring over, you know, Ellis from Iowa State and a couple other guys. I really like that group, as does Norvell, it seems. And finally, the wide receivers are making plays. They had a great scrimmage, combined for a bunch of touchdowns, which is awesome to hear. I really like this group's potential. To me, it feels more in line with some of those early Bobo years. And even then, you got to be careful with the comparisons, because even that 2015 team had Rashard Higgins still, and then obviously Michael Gallup was in the mix for a couple of years. Those are NFL receivers. Tory is obviously an NFL receiver. We're going to talk about him in just a second. I don't know if you have somebody whose ceiling is on par with those three guys. I do think you've got a couple of receivers that do have NFL potential, but just physically, those guys are kind of on another level. They were freaks, but I do think when you look up at the end of the year, you're going to have between 4, 5, 6 guys, including the tight ends as well, that are all going to have, 450, 500 plus receiving yards and, 4 plus touchdowns. I don't know if they're going to keep the 1,000-yard receiver streak going, but I do think that this is a group that's going to be versatile. They've got a variety of ways that they'll be able to attack defenses. And again, I think it's going to be beneficial to not be so dependent all on one guy, and not have the offense really be designed around one person. I just think it's going to make CSU a lot tougher to key in on defensively. And, I just think especially halfway through last year or whatever it was, when Tory was officially out for good after that Oregon State game or whatever, it was clear that the chemistry wasn't there with the rest of the group. And I'm hoping that, by having 6, 7, 8 different guys that you feel pretty good about going into the year, it's just going to make CSU a lot more versatile and a lot more multiple with the type of personnel they're able to throw out there. We're going to keep this rolling. I'm going to talk about Tory Horton here in just a second. Had a really strong preseason debut with the Seahawks, and we'll go down memory lane, talk about the biggest conference wins of the Mountain West era. I will shout out a couple of our partners real quick, and then we'll get into it. Coors Light encourages you to never lose your chill. Life tests you guys. I'm not going to do the same bit I've done 800 times, talk about all the things that have been tough in my life over the last calendar year. But I will say, like many other people, I went through a lot. Life threw a lot of curveballs, and it tested me. And there were times where I probably didn't deal with the stress all that productively. And after the fact, I would always just kind of shake my head and be like, wow, that was not beneficial at all. Got even angrier about something that was already a crappy situation. And now I'm just prolonging, being able to do something productive. And you got to do the little things, whether it's, get some exercise, get some time in the sunshine, just get something done. For me, when I'm in a rut, the simple act of accomplishing a task, what it can do for your mental, mind frame is incredible. But once you do that, whatever you do, whatever it is that you have to do to put yourself in that chill state of mind, kick back, get some football on, crack open an ice cold Coors Light. You know the deal. When the mountains turn blue, it's as cold as the Rockies. Coors Light is cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged for a smooth finish. Make the most out of the times you choose to chill by choosing Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door. Visit CoorsLight.com/DNVR. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. I also want to talk to you about our friends over at Empire Today. Just like your favorite team needs a home court / home field advantage, depending on what sport you want to compare to, you need a home floor advantage. Empire Today can help you get it. Empire Today has flooring experts, dedicated flooring professionals who focus on flooring every single day. We've all been to those big box stores. You wander aimlessly, simply trying to find somebody who can help you. I'm far from an expert when it comes to any of this type of stuff. I'm definitely in over my head when it comes to home ownership. What I love about Empire Today is, unlike those big box stores, that the people that you are going to be interacting with, this is all they do. It's not a situation where they were in paint last week, they're going to be in gardening next week, they happen to be in flooring the day that you go in there. These are experts at their craft. They live and breathe flooring. Schedule a free in-home estimate today, because some things are just better at home. DNVR listeners can receive a $350 discount when using the promo code DNVR. You heard that right, a $350 discount with that code DNVR. Restrictions do apply. Visit Empire Today/DNVR for full details. All righty. Unsurprisingly, we've got some fluff trolls in the Toyota chat, but I'll pity you a little bit. I'll comment on one. Donovan says Horton will get hurt again, like always. Thanks for the views, buddy. But I will say that durability is a fair critique of his career to this point. It's ultimately what prevented him from going higher in the draft than he's certainly capable of. To me, had Tory stayed healthy throughout last season, the absolute latest he goes is somewhere in the third round. I think he had an opportunity to potentially play his way into, the second round. First round, probably a little bit ambitious if you were hoping for that, but you never know, because I really do feel like with what he brings to the table, he's an every down NFL receiver. When healthy, he runs, a 4.39, which is pretty freaking incredible. The fact that he ran a 4.41 just a couple of months coming off of the knee surgery, not even, 75% healthy, is a testament to his athleticism. I do understand, though, because not just the knee stuff, but even going back to 2023, he did struggle to stay on the field at times. And part of that was probably due to the insane target load that he was getting. I mean, you go back, you look at the matchup in Boulder in 2023 when he really ate CU alive. Up in all those games, he's getting double-digit targets. He's taking a lot of hits. It wasn't always easy catches either. A lot of them are in the open field. They love to get him the quick screen. In hindsight, maybe you wish you would have limited some of that just to kind of reduce some of those shots that he was taking in the open field. But I mean, Tory's tough as nails. That was never in question. What would have caused a lot of folks to miss multiple games in 2023, he gutted it out and then chose to return to CSU on top of that, even despite all of the heartbreak at the end of the year and missing bowl eligibility. I mean, it wasn't Tory's fault. You look at his production, like undoubtedly he did everything that he could that season to give CSU a chance to reach the postseason. It did not work out. It's heartbreaking that he didn't get to be a bigger part of last season. I do think had, a healthy Tory been in the mix, maybe you do actually make the Mountain West championship game. Maybe that Fresno game goes a little bit different. I know for certain that it's a game that he had, highlighted on his calendar like over a year in advance whenever they announced it, because he was a Fresno kid. They didn't recruit him, and he was itching to, go back there and really put it on him. I do think that the staff would have done everything in their power to, give him a chance to go off on that night. But all of that is to say that it is what it is. It played out the way that it did. We all get it. He ends up falling to the fifth round, and I think he's really going to end up being one of the steals of the draft when it's all said and done. Now, I do want to add, for some context here, I'm not one of those folks that gets too carried away with preseason takes, positively or negatively. I think you see it all the time. Some rookie comes out and does well in preseason. Everybody crowns him the next big thing, and then it just doesn't play out that way, because the football that you're seeing in preseason is not NFL football. It's slop. It's a lot like summer league and basketball. Weird stuff is going to happen when you have an odd mix of, a couple starters, and this guy's second string, this guy's third team, this guy's not even going to be on the team. You've got to keep that in mind and kind of temper your expectations and basically just take all the results, both positively and negatively, with a grain of salt. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't some things you can take away from it. And, if you're a CSU fan right now, I think you should be really optimistic about, what Tory showed in that first game. Scoring a touchdown is great. Again, it's preseason, but the way that he scored in particular, I thought was encouraging. He spins off of the defender, ends up scoring like a 10-yard touchdown. 3 catches that day in the touchdown, but did lead Seattle in targets with 731 receiving yards. Nothing crazy, but I think what was really exciting was you could see that Tory, one, was not thinking out there, but two, he was playing at full speed. And Joel Dreesen, legendary CSU Ram, former Bronco and Texan and Jet, I believe, he posted that night that, Tory was playing at NFL speed, which is really, really encouraging regarding, where he's at, in his playbook wise, but also just from a health standpoint. I think it's good to see him moving as well as he is this fresh off of the knee surgery, and the fact that, he was able to put on close to 10 pounds of muscle in that recovery process. He's maintained that weight, but he's maintained it without losing any of his speed. any of his elusiveness, any of the things that made him so dangerous and what made him a valuable prospect in the first place. I do love him playing a little bit heavier, and people got to remember he's young. He's really young. Like he's still 21, I believe, maybe 22 by the time the season rolls around. Physically, he's not even in his prime yet. He's only going to get bigger and stronger from here. He's always had the speed. You can't teach that. You can get a little bit faster, but not 4.39 speed. I'm just really excited for him that this opportunity is paying off. There've been some cool features that he's been really honest and talked about how he was in a pretty dark place after last season. And why wouldn't you be? You come back with hopes of validating your draft stock, of being the guy. You turn down money at a bunch of bigger schools, SEC schools, Texas Tech, all these schools that had been in his DMs for years. I mean, he could have cashed in on that payday, and if nothing else, guaranteed that he got paid then, because there's no guarantees. Like, he's young. You feel fairly optimistic about his potential of recovering from the knee injury and still being able to, have a substantial NFL career, but you just never know. And, this time last year, there was just a lot of questions, and I'm really happy for him. I think his speed has always been, that of an NFL receiver, his ability to make guys miss in the open field. He's a great route runner, his hands, all of that. Really, really reliable. The big thing for him is obviously just going to be staying healthy. And if he is able to do that, I think there's a really nice opportunity for him to be a productive playmaker. And, obviously I've got the green and gold on. I'm not trying to be just like 100% fanboy, but I mean, to me, he is somebody who you could maybe, sprinkle a little bit on for offensive rookie of the year. Obviously, it tends to go to the skill guys, or, if you've got a stud quarterback, but I think there's at least an opportunity there. My guess is if Cam Ward even has like a relatively successful season, it'll go to him. We all know it. Quarterbacks, they get all the glory, but it would not shock me if you look up at the end of the year and, Tory flirted with 1,000 yards and, had some touchdowns. I just think there's going to be an opportunity there. They've got Jackson Smith and Jigba, but really other than him, like there's just not a ton of established receivers at this point. In the post DK Metcalf era in Seattle, new offensive system, but you got, a Kubiak calling plays. So, he's going to get prioritized. I had somebody point out in the comments that it's surprising nobody else had brought that up. That was literally the first thing I wrote when he got drafted, that it was a great situation because the Kubiaks historically have been very kind to next level Rams. But I'm excited for Tory. I thought he really looked good. I think he's moving well. And while I'm not going to get too carried away with preseason reactions like a lot of folks out there, I do want to say it was a very encouraging start and what will hopefully be a very long career for our guy. Let's pivot into the main topic of the day, which is the biggest wins, the biggest conference wins in the Mountain West era, which obviously debuted in 1999. If my math is correct, CSU is 144 and 179 in the Mountain West era overall. They are 93 and 105 in conference games, which not great, not completely dreadful, but when you consider they went 35 and 15 over the first 50, the fact that they're only 93 and 105 at this stage, it is very clear, how rough things were there for a while at the end of the Lubick era, throughout the Fairchild era, and then, early McElwain as well, just really killed the record. Before we get into that, I do want to shout out a couple of other partners. If you got any questions, comments, etc., keep them rolling in the Toyota chat. If I don't respond to it right away, we'll star it and we'll come back at the end. Let's shout out those partners, then we'll get into it. We'll get into the top 10 conference wins of the Mountain West era for old CSU football. Whether you need snapbacks, truckers, fitteds, beanies, or tees, Branded Bills has you covered with performance and style. If you're looking for some gear to make your brand stand apart from the crowd, Branded Bills has you covered with the best custom headwear. Start your order and their dedicated team will help you create the exact custom apparel you need. They've got a partnership with CSU. I've got the black one on, got the gold one on the display shelf back there. Really, really comfy. Check them out. They've got a lot of awesome different styles. I just went with kind of like the classic trucker, I don't know, athletic type fit. You see a lot of golfers wearing these style of hats these days, but they've got all kinds of options on there. Head to brandedbills.com. Use that code BBDNVR for 15% off of your first order. Shout out to Branded Bills, the official presenting partner of the DNVR Rams podcast. Trucks have always been a part of Toyota's DNA. For generations, Toyota's built durable legends destined for greatness and perfect for Colorado. Whether you're conquering off-road trails or whether you're hauling the weight of the world, there's a Toyota truck that's just right for you. Check out the Tacoma, the Land Cruiser's back. They've got 17 models with available all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive like the Epic 4Runner. Toyota also offers more low and zero emission vehicles combined than any other automaker to give customers numerous choices to reduce their carbon footprint. 16 hybrid vehicles to choose from. Check out the Tundra iForce Max hybrid truck. Toyota SUVs, not to be outdone. They take command on the road and on the trail, so it makes them perfect for Colorado. You can take them skiing. You can take them around Cap Hill. You can go, off-roading on the slope or something like that. Take it up to Horsetooth. Toyota, a proud partner of CSU Athletics and the official vehicle of DNVR. Toyota, let's go places. All right. I thought it'd be kind of fun to go through this. I know we've been doing a lot of historical type shows of late, kind of, Mountain West in review, but it is weird to think that this is going to be our last season in the conference. If you missed it, I published a piece on the site the other day. It was a concept that I'd kind of been thinking about while I was on PTO, but I was just feeling nostalgic and admittedly a little bit bittersweet. Like I am fully on board for the move to the Pac-12, but I'm 30 years old, and we're in year 26 of the Mountain West era. This is quite literally all I've ever known, and that's what I wrote about for Diehards. Just kind of some of those epic moments along the way, and not all of them were even necessarily wins. Like, it's easy to point to the 2005 goal line stand against Utah, which we will once again talk about today, but like even that 2008 like thriller against BYU where Joey Porter chest bumps Gartrell Johnson, and just little stuff like that. Like it's weird to me to think that era, all that I've ever known, is coming to an end, and I am going to miss it a little bit. And more so on the basketball side, I think, than the football side, especially like the last 15 years. I've really grown to love Mountain West hoops, but I don't know. It's a little bit weird for me. We're going to start at 10. We'll work our way through. I've also got a couple of honorable mentions. Like I said, keep the comments rolling in the Toyota chat. Love to hear your feedback. I'd love to hear what ones I might have missed, all of that. But at number 10, and I went back and forth on this, whether I should do the 2015 win against Fresno State, aka the Joe Hansley game where he housed a couple of punt returns. I think he might have caught a touchdown that night as well. If you remember back, that 2015 team under Bobo had to win the last couple of games to qualify for a bowl. Ultimately, we're 7-5 in the regular season before falling to Marshall on the New Mexico Bowl. I've got a couple of examples on this list where the Rams did similar things, had to win the regular season finale in order to achieve bowl eligibility. To me, those type of matchups are always going to carry a little bit more weight, as do rivalry matchups, as do matchups against who are considered the premier brands at any time. At one point, that was Utah and BYU, TCU, those type of teams. Boise has obviously been that team since 2011. But at number 10, I actually went with the road win over San Diego State. CSU, they went into Qualcomm still at the time and beat who finished as an 11-win team, that San Diego State team, 63-31. It's funny, as bad as the Potato Bowl ended up being that year, where the defense just decided they weren't going to show up. Nobody wanted to be in that game. I get it. It was freezing. It was miserable. As brutal as that matchup was, that was sandwiched in between, arguably Bobo's biggest regular season win, this this conference finale win against San Diego State, and then obviously the inaugural game against Oregon State to begin the 2017 season. The offense scored 50 plus points in all of those games. It really felt like it was trending in the direction that we all thought things were going when McElwain was here. But I know San Diego State already had their place in the conference championship clinched. They did not really have anything to play for that night. It was pouring rain. All of that is fair to point out for context. But to beat an 11-win San Diego State team by 30 in their own building, I do think it's still in the conversation here. I called this game the Michael Gallup game. He had certainly established his presence at that point, but he had 3 touchdowns and 139 yards that night. Even Robert Ruiz caught a touchdown. Izzy, Dalen, and Marvin combined for about 270 on the ground. Izzy and Dalen both went over the century mark on the ground. That point, at that point, man, the running game was rolling. They did the same thing against New Mexico in the Hughes finale. But I put the San Diego State win. I really went back and forth of whether I should do that, whether I should do the 2015 win over Fresno, or the final night at Hughes, which I did focus on a couple of weeks back. So I did leave that off. As we start this, I'm already starting to regret that. I do think sending off Hughes the right way was a big win. But I just tried to value the quality of the win. What type of opponent were you going up against? And even if that San Diego State team didn't have a ton to play for that night, they were an 11-win team. They had Donnell Pumphrey and Rashad Penny, a couple of NFL running backs on the roster. And the defense really stepped up. They contained those two, who combined for 22 carries for just 67 yards. I think Pumphrey had a touchdown, but I mean, you'll live with that, especially based on what he had done to CSU and the couple of matchups leading up to that one. If you would have asked me after that game, is Mike Bobo the real deal? I would have said with a lot of confidence, absolutely. And even knowing everything we know now, and admittedly, I second guess it more than I used to, I still think there is a world in which if Colin Hill had never gotten injured, that Mike Bobo era just plays out completely differently. And I think he is a better football coach than he is maybe given credit for. Number 9, we're going the 2008 win over Wyoming. The Rams had lost by 21 in the Springs before, but they closed the regular season with double-digit wins over both New Mexico and Wyoming before winning a fun New Mexico Bowl against Fresno State. Every now and then I'll go back and watch the highlights from that one. There were a lot of really fun plays. Gartrell Johnson just goes crazy. Sets like a school record, I think, for all-purpose yards in that one. Corey Sperry caught like a Hail Mary touchdown at the end of the first half. It was a really fun matchup. But to get to that point, to reach a bowl in the first place, CSU had to beat New Mexico and Wyoming first in consecutive weeks. The Rams go into Laramie in the regular season finale. They win 31-20. Dion Morton went off. If you don't know that name, if you can find highlights, the 2008 Rams were not a great football team. They were a really fun football team, though. Every game felt like it was a shootout. Dion Morton, Rayshawn Greer. It would just be a bunch of vertical play action shots off of the run game, which was obviously very successful with Gartrell and Kyle Bell. A lot of guys that are pretty high up on my all-time favorite Rams list, and Dion Morton in particular, and maybe not the household name that Higgins and Horton and some of these guys are, but Morton had some big plays that year, and this was the biggest game of his career, to score 3 touchdowns up in Laramie to help lead CSU to a bowl game. It was huge. And again, it's funny how all of this plays out. Obviously the Fairchild era in its totality was just a disaster, and that was immediately evident. I mean, they went 3-9 and 4-8, whatever, every other season after 2008. But if you would have asked me during that stretch, when CSU closes with 3 straight regular season wins, they win the New Mexico Bowl against Fresno. Fresno had, I'm trying to blank on their running back. He went on and played for the Chargers. I think it was Ryan Matthews. He was a stud on that team as well. But the regular season win to get back to the postseason for the first time since 2005. You'd had a couple of losing seasons in a row, including the 2007 season, which was obviously Sonny's last one. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. But I think that win in Laramie was huge. It wasn't a particularly good Wyoming team, but it was a huge win when you factor in all of the other context. And I'm glad that guys like Kyle Bell and some of those other veterans in the program were able to go out with a little bit of success, despite, their careers not really panning out the way that they thought it would. Some of those guys that came in, in that 05, 06 type range, post, peak Lubick era, you had an idea of what CSU was going to be. And unfortunately, they regressed pretty hard as a program. And then, the next 15 years really ended up being wasted. But on that day, really in that month, December of 2008, there was a lot of hope at the time because, people were excited about that Fairchild era. He'd been a successful NFL offensive coordinator. He was a CSU guy. Admittedly, that whole process, though, completely changed how I view things. Yes, it's great to hire a guy with CSU ties, with school ties when they're the right hire. But more importantly, you've just got to hire a good coach. And I think Nico Medved's a perfect example of that. Number 8, we've got the 2003 win over UNLV. Once again, a regular season finale win to clinch bowl eligibility. CSU wins 24-23 in Vegas. I don't remember this game as vividly as I remember the 0-2 game, which is still one of the more painful losses that I've experienced as a CSU supporter. But the Rams got a little bit of revenge, if you remember back. Chance to win their 11th game in 2002, a chance to run the table in conference play for the first and only time. UNLV ends up stealing one in Fort Collins and in the regular season finale in 2003. The Rams are able to get them back. It's kind of weird if you go back and you look at the schedules from throughout the early 2000s. It seemed like CSU played UNLV or San Diego State in the regular season finale like every year. There was a stretch there where it really felt like the league was trying to make CSU UNLV a thing. They played in that 0-2 finale, but they played again in 2003, 2005 as well. The Rams actually did the same thing. They beat the Rebels in Vegas to earn that 6th win and ultimately reach bowl eligibility. The reason I went 0-3 over 0-5 was the fact that it was the final regular season game of Bradley Van Pelt's career. That season had kind of been really frustrating. That was a good team. Like if you just look at the record on paper, you don't recognize how good they actually were. I mean, they lost by a touchdown to CU in Denver. Awesome game. Joel Klatt was the quarterback, like 42-35, I think. 3 or 4 years in a row there where it was a one-score game. They lost by a touchdown to Utah and Wyoming as well. So, I mean, you're a handful of plays of the season going completely different. The worst loss of the year was actually to Miami of Ohio. Big Ben Roethlisberger comes into town and puts up a monster game before he ends up being a first-round pick by the Steelers that following spring. But they went out the right way, and a guy who is to this day still viewed as one of the most significant players in the program history, maybe the most popular player in CSU football history, at least got to go out in the regular season because they would go on to lose the Kraft Fight Hunger Bowl, I believe, to Boston College. But at least they went out the right way in the regular season. So number 7, we're going the 2013 win over Air Force. Once again, clinches bowl eligibility. But this was the biggest margin of defeat that the Rams have ever had in the matchups against the Falcons. What made it particularly fun was CSU got shut out the week before. They went into Logan, lost to a really good Utah State team, 13-0. Some weird circumstances with that one from what I've heard. Capri didn't play, I believe, and it kind of based on everything that I've heard over the years. I don't want to speak for him. I'd love to ask him about it, but basically kind of quit on his team that day. I don't think he was super popular within the locker room at that stage. But that's all beside the point. Comes back and has a monster game against Air Force, and obviously goes off in the New Mexico Bowl as well. But Rashard Higgins and Capri combined for about 5 touchdowns that day. Grayson threw for almost 400 yards. Really just thumped them. That was not a good Air Force team. They were only 2-win team. Again, the biggest margin of defeat that CSU has ever had. But to do that against a Calhoun-led team, whether they were a 2-win team or not, that's something that I'm always going to hold pretty high in regard, just because we know how good of a coach he is. And obviously the series history against Air Force was not too kind. But at that point, man, we were all riding pretty high the second half of the 2013 regular season, which is obviously capped off by one of the craziest bowl games of all time. And then 2014, where it all really comes together and you win 10 games. And just a lot of fun there at the end of the 2013 run. At number 6, I jump forward to that 2014 season. This is personally my favorite memory of the McElwain era, which is saying something. He beat Wyoming a couple times, went 2-1 against CU. But the 2014 homecoming win over Utah State, the Rams win 16-13 on a Jared Roberts walk-off game-winning field goal. The Rams were 5-1, I believe, coming into that matchup. I think Utah State was 4-2. Again, I'm going to keep pumping this should be a regional rival with the trophy narrative, but both teams were really good. CSU had momentum at that point. You'd won the showdown. You beat Boston College on the road. This was the second conference game. You started with a win in Reno, kind of a quiet win. You win by a touchdown, but this was a matchup that really drew some buzz. Obviously, it's homecoming, so you're going to have a good crowd anyways. But CSU sold out Hughes for the first time since the 2004 border war. It just felt like they were on the verge of really breaking out, and obviously that's what would go on to happen. But to me, it that night, like, that was validation of the program under Jim McElwain and proof that they had really arrived and that team was different, man. Like, to win that game the way that they did against a program who had given you some trouble in the years leading up to it, were really well coached. To win that one in the fashion that they did, it was so dramatic, really a defensive thriller. The funny thing is CSU went right down the field on that first series. If you remember back, I think it was D. Hart scored like a 1-yard rushing touchdown, but it was in the first 2 minutes of the game. Just went right down the field. Easy. It seems like we're going to be on pace for a shootout, and then it kind of reverts back to the previous year's matchup where Utah State won 13-0. CSU only scored 1 touchdown in 2 years against Utah State, but managed to go 1-1 in those matchups. Thank God Jared Roberts was so clutch in that matchup. He kicked a 52-yarder. He also made a pair of 46-yarders in the final 2 minutes, first to tie the game. Then the defense gets a stop. The offense benefits from a big run from D. Hart. And then, I'm trying to remember. I think it might have just been like a simple fade route to Higgins up the sideline, but he sets Roberts up for the game winner, drills the 46-yarder. The students storm the field. One of my favorite nights as a student, one of my favorite wins in program history. And when I look back on the McElwain era, to me, like, that's just one of those special moments. Yes, it's easy to point to the showdowns, but that one meant a little bit more to me because CSU lived up to the moment. How many times over the years have we seen the Rams, especially at home, where everything is set up for it to be this transcendent moment, and a lot like the bowl game last year, they find a way to shoot themselves in the foot. Historically, outside of the peak part of the Lubick era, that was just a moment where CSU would have came up short. And with the lights bright, with a sold-out crowd, with some national attention against a program that had been really good, the Rams found a way to get it done. And I'll never forget that night. One of my favorite nights in Hughes. And obviously the 2014 season would really, go on to be one of the special ones. Rick in the Toyota chat says, awesome finish. You could feel the energy in the stadium in the fourth quarter. Everyone had faith that the Rams could pull out the win. That's what was so funny about the McElwain era, is we had a level of swagger and cockiness within the fan base that's certainly not been around since. Really, it's been, I feel like we're abused dogs at this point. I don't like using that comparison. I'm a big dog guy, but I just mean we're constantly waiting for the other shoe to fall. But at that point, like, you just expected them to do it. They had already, pulled off the win against CU. They pulled off a clutch win on the road against Boston College. You just kind of assumed that they would get it done. And they did, man. It was awesome. Number 5, we're going the 2002 win over Air Force in Colorado Springs. We've only beat Air Force twice in the Springs in the last 25 years. I guess maybe 3 times because they beat them in 2000 as well. But went into the Springs, drubbed an 8-win Air Force team 31-12 to move to 8-2 on the season. This was Halloween night. CSU had they'd already beaten CU, Utah, BYU, and Wyoming at that point. This was their first game back in the top 25 after a weird loss to Fresno earlier in the year had knocked them out. It's a Thursday night game. Like, to me, this is when I think of Mountain West football in the early 2000s. This Halloween night, Air Force. It was like 16 degrees out, absolutely freezing. This is the perfect example. Me and my dad got a Tombstone frozen pizza going. It's cold, so we're cozied up on the couch, watching Sonny and the boys take on the Fly Boys down in the Springs. And the Rams showed up, man. Like Sonny was always so big in those rivalry matchups, but Cecil had a great game. He had 132 yards on the ground, both caught and rushed for a touchdown. I had forgotten about this until I was reading about it, but Jeff Babcock, the kicker for CSU, actually had a scoop and score in that game. Air Force returner had busted off a long return, and then he got stripped, and Babcock picked it up, scooped, and scored. CSU would get a couple of fourth down stops in the third quarter that allowed them to hang on, and the Rams pull off a decisive win in the Springs against a quality Air Force team. That 02 season, man, was something else. I love thinking back on some of those matchups, but to me, like this 2002 game against Air Force, like this is peak Mountain West conference matchup, Thursday night, ESPN2, the whole deal. It's what I get really nostalgic about, and it's why I love to reminisce about those times. All right, now we're into the top four here. Number four, we're going the Wyoming win in 2000. The Rams win 37-13. The Rams were 8-2 coming in, so they had a great record. Matt Newton having a huge season at quarterback, but they had lost 44-40 in the Springs the week before, so they needed this win over Wyoming to clinch the Mountain West title outright. If you remember, in 1999, the first year that the Mountain West existed, CSU, BYU, and Utah all shared the Mountain West title. This was before they had a conference title game. But the Rams in 2000 clinched the first outright title in conference history, and they did so by capping off the regular season almost with a win over Wyoming. The Rams finished 14th in the AP poll that year after beating Louisville in the Liberty Bowl. But this was another classic Thursday night game at Hughes, also probably on ESPN2. Not a good Wyoming team, but Cecil goes crazy. He had a pair of touchdowns. 8 catches for 100 yards and a touchdown from Will Lane. I don't remember that number, but shout out to Will Lane. CSU had a pair of pick sixes defensively in the matchup. Rick Crowell and Justin Gallimore, pair of great Rams from a great linebacker and cornerback, respectively. CSU defense was actually top 20 in scoring that year. I think they averaged about 18.5 points a game allowed, if I remember correctly. Going back through all those numbers, it all kind of starts to blur together. But that was the win that clinched the program's first ever outright Mountain West title and the first outright Mountain West title, period, in the conference's history. So I put it just above some of those 99 wins, despite the fact that you could say, some of those games late in the 99 season probably meant as much. But winning the outright title feels a little bit better than having to split it, particularly when it's with Utah and BYU, who are kind of the bullies of the league back at that stage, although BYU would kind of take a dip after their dominance of, the 80s and 90s more so. And, really by the 2000s, Utah had kind of taken the crown from them. I will get into that all here in just a second. Let me take a quick breather real quick. All right. Top three, drum roll, please. I know some people will maybe push back on this one because how do you do the regular season finale for a team that finished 3-9 as one of the most important conference wins in a 26-year stretch? But to me, the 2007 win over Wyoming, 36-28, November 23rd, Sonny Lubbock's final game. I don't know if you knew it at the moment going in. I know there were some rumblings about what the future might hold for Sonny at that point, but I don't think it was confirmed or known 100%. He's not going to be back. He knew, obviously, but it's really important to me that Sonny went out the right way. The fact that he did it against Wyoming, who I believe he was 10-5 against in his career, and really had owned in that matchup, and up until the end, I think at one point it was like 10-2. He is CSU football, like what he did, particularly from 94 to 2003, as I wrote the other day, it was unprecedented, and it's been unmatched since. I think realistically in the modern era, we'll never see CSU do again what they did under Lubick. Would be great to come close, because if they did, you'd be in the college football playoff. But I just think that him going out the right way meant a lot to a lot of people, and as much as it sucks the way that the end of the Lubick era played out, and I still think they should have given him one more year. And I think if they do, that 08 team, which went to a bowl anyways, probably would have been even better than they were. But Gartrell scored twice in it. Caleb Haney, who I'm rocking today, he threw a couple of touchdowns. Wyoming scored twice late in the third to take the lead, but the Rams ensured victory with a couple of scores in the fourth. I've talked about it with Kyle Bell, but there was no way they were losing that game against Wyoming. It had been a brutal season. They lost all these frustrating games early in the season to CU and Houston, and like all these coin flip games against good teams that very easily could have gone a different way, and the season would have been completely different. Sonny'd be in the College Football Hall of Fame today, all of that. But if nothing else, at least he got to go out in the building that he elevated against CSU's biggest rival in Wyoming. It matters a lot to me, and I am a romantic about all this kind of stuff. But to me, that win over Wyoming for a 3-win CSU team, that matters to me about as much as any win in the last 25 years. Because again, Sonny is CSU football. This is his program. It always will be. Number 2, the 2023 win over Boise State. Boise's been everyone's bully since coming into the league. I'll never forget that 2011 game where, man, they're still like at the peak of their program at that point. I mean, they're legitimate national championship contenders. They come into Hughes and just thump the Rams. I'm trying to remember who that was at quarterback still at that point, but they have been the face of the league since they've come in. They have been the glass ceiling that the Rams hadn't been able to get through. Finally, in 2023, it took an incredible, crazy, fluky comeback to pull it off. If everything stays the same in the first 75% of that game and you play the scenario out 1,000 times, Boise State probably wins 999 of them, but not on that night. On that night, Jeanty ran out of gas. A couple of bounces went CSU's way, which, let's be real, they were due. I mean, they should have won that 2017 game. Everything that had to go wrong for CSU did in that second half. They were probably due some of that luck to go the other way. But it was a milestone win. It was the biggest league win that CSU's had in the last decade. And again, like, to me, it's just really important at this stage of things going into the Pac-12 era. Like, you can't view Boise as the big bad bully who you can't hang with. This isn't 2011 anymore. Boise, Oregon State, Washington State, those are your peers. And I think just optically, it would have been a really weird look going into the league as, one of the new faces. All these Mountain West schools, along with Oregon State and Washington State, are going to be like the new faces of the league. Just optically, it would have been a bad feeling if CSU was still winless against Boise. Hopefully in the next decade or so, you're able to see the Rams get the all-time results a little bit closer. I will say, if he beats Wyoming and Air Force again this year, if he were to beat them in back-to-back seasons on top of being the guy that snapped the streak against Boise, and he had a great performance in Boulder, it's pretty impressive in some big-time matchups. Been some rough ones as well. Laramie in 2023 was rough. CU last year was not good, but he's had some pretty key moments against some pretty big conference wins, and we'll see. Maybe he can pull off a couple more this year here. Finally, at number 1, I think if you follow the pod, it's easy, but it's got to be the 2005 win over Utah. The goal line stand. Kyle Whittingham, to this day, still refers to it as the most painful loss of his career. That was his first season as head coach after taking over for Urban Meyer. The season started with a heartbreaker. You lose to the Buffs, then you get blown out by Lawrence Maroney and the Buffs. But after that, they responded well. They beat Nevada, they beat Air Force, and then moved above 500 with the win over Utah. The Utes weren't quite as good that year. They did finish 7-5, and they went to a bowl game, but in 03 and 04, man, they had been dominant. They had gone 22-2 the 2 years before. They went 12-0 in 2004, finished number 4 in the AP poll. They beat the Rams by 32 the year before that. So, I mean, they were the big bad bully that were kicking everybody's ass. And the Rams, they won a thriller, man. They were down 14-3 going into the fourth, scored 18 points, 3 touchdowns, all of which had unsuccessful 2-point conversions. But Kyle Bell broke off a 49-yarder with a little over 5 minutes left to take the lead. Probably the biggest touchdown of his CSU career. Utah mounted a 75-plus yard drive, got all the way within the 4-yard line, 1st and goal within the 4. You've got 4 downs to score, and the CSU defense steps up in front of a raucous Hughes crowd, and they pull off the goal line stand against an incredible program in Utah. To this day, still CSU's probably best win in the Mountain West era. I think it's that or Boise, obviously. I just think those two programs, based on the amount of success they've had against the league during their respective time periods, I just think wins over those schools matter a little bit more. A couple of honorable mentions before we get out of here. The 2003 win over BYU, the Rams went into Provo, won 58-13. That BYU team was not very good, but it's tough to win in Provo, so to win 58-13. 2005 UNLV, a lot like 03, win the regular season finale to clinch bowl eligibility. 2012 New Mexico, rough year, but under McElwain, you started and ended with wins. You beat CU and Mac's first game ever, and then you end with a win over New Mexico, and it allowed you to feel good going into 2013. And that process ended up being weird too, because you started 2-4, but obviously closed strong, and the bowl and everything that happens with it. 2015 Fresno, one of the wonkier, more fun wins, 34-31, returned a couple of kicks for scores. 2020 Wyoming, just because that year was so weird. It was about the only positive we got, the only rivalry win of the McBride brothers' careers. Nevada 2022, just optically, I think if you fall to 0-5, if you lose that game after how awful September had been, if you lose to that Nevada team in Reno after taking all their talent, it just would have been a bad scene. I think the Norvell era would have been over before it really even had a realistic chance to get started. But it was huge. And then the Wyoming and Air Force wins from 2024, I think, are in the mix. I don't have them quite on par with some of these wins we've talked about today, but certainly great moments. Before we get out, Taylor wants to know in the Twitter chat, did you talk about potential changes to football game days that Weber mentioned? No, but I do think that's a good idea, and I think that's something we can talk about on the show on Tuesday. We'll be going live Tuesday and Thursday for the rest of fall camp. We've got media day coming up for CSU football on Wednesday, so I'm going to have an opportunity to speak with a bunch of different players, so make sure you're keeping an eye on the Twitter and the site and everything. We'll have a bunch of written content, bunch of social content, all that fun stuff coming your way. Shout out to Dion, our awesome producer, who has just been kicking ass of late. He actually played for CU football, but he has been killing it over here on the Rams side of things with us. I'm really appreciative of him. Thank you so much for listening to the DNVR Rams podcast presented by Branded Bills. Head to brandedbills.com. Use that code BBDNVR for 15% off of your first order. Much love, y'all. We are always proud to be. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.